This video discusses how to create functions using Python. So in the pseudocode, we're going to have the main function to read from a file and write to a file. We're going to check to see if the file exists and read the data from that file. Then after that, we will write the data to the file. Using the HypoChart, hierarchical input-output processing chart, this is the other tool that we use to lay out or visually outline how the functions will be created and how they are related to each other. So we have the main function, main program to read from an external file and write to an external file. And then within that main function, we'll have two other functions, read the file and check to see if it exists in the folder or the directory. And then we will write the output to the file. Let's take a look at the actual Python code. We are using a previous sample program where we did show you how to read from a file and write to a file. Now we're going to reorganize this program into functions. Main program function, our module. We're going to type DEF and we'll say, I'll just say main read write program. I'll just say main read write. Open close parentheses and a colon. So I have just defined, or rather described, my function header, DEF, followed by the function name, main, RW for read write. Next, all the statements that are associated with this main function must be indented. So we're going to go in and highlight all the way down to the very end of the program before the end statement. And next we will go to the format menu of Python or whatever editor you're using. You'll find a way to indent the whole region. So if you're dealing with a function, all the statements or block of statements that are associated with that function must be indented. And it stops at the end here. So we'll say in main RW function or module. Now that we have created the main function, let's try to implement or execute this function. So we're going to click run or press function key 5. And when we do that, nothing happens. The reason is that while we defined the function, we never called it. So outside of that program function, I'll just add a little line to separate it out. That main function. The instructions associated with that. Main, you'll see it being used a lot in the textbook, but you have to be very explicit. Whatever that variable name is, that function name rather, that's what you want to use. So let's run the program again. So we run. Enter the file name you would like to read from, and I'll say philosophers. Enter the file name where you wish to write to. I'll just say philosophers report. I'll just say philosophers underscore report. What heading or title do you wish to write in the output? I'll say philosophers list. And just like the previous program, we'll say contents from the philosophers file has been written to the philosopher's report.txt file. Be sure to view it in the same folder where the Python source code was stored. So let's go and find that source. So now here's the file, philosopher's report. That's what we just created. And here it is. Looks very similar to a previous program, except now the program is set up as a main function. Now we're going to go and create two other functions from this program. So let's do that next. So from lines 13 through lines 25, that's going to be a function of its own. So we're going to pull this out of the program, the main program area, and create its own little function. I'm going to cut that out. And your function can be defined immediately right outside of your main function. It can immediately after that or before that. Either one, either way, it doesn't matter. I will place it above. So I'm going to add a line and say function to check the existence of a file in the folder. That's basically what we're doing. We're just checking the existence of that file in the folder so we can read it. And so we're going to say def check file. Open close parentheses, colon. And next, I'll go at the beginning and right click, and I'm going to save. Now, I will use some generic names, although it doesn't really matter what you call these things, but I'm going to use some generic names. Okay, so I'm using some local variables, and that's one thing about working with functions. Functions have local variables, global variables, local parameters, and actual parameters. Currently, a local variable is a variable that is only known within the scope of that function. So file input, ifile, these are variables that are only known within the scope of this function, inside this function only. And the way this function is going to work, the computer is going to do everything that it did in a regular, as though it were in a regular file, line by line, except it's going to work on this specific task, asking the user to enter a file name. Well, it's going to check to see if the file name that the user entered exists. If it exists, it'll move forward. But it's going to return this information back to the main program that is going to call it. But this is the function itself. So now in my main program at line 29, I have print enter the name of the file you would like to read from. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use some actual variables or parameters so that the computer can understand how to maneuver and manipulate this particular function. So when we get ready to create new functions, we have to make sure that the functions that are being created, which has either local variables and parameters, will align or act as transporters or placeholders for where they're being called. And it's going to take a little time, a little practice to understand what's going on, but we are now adding, these are just the variables that are in the main program that we're going to use to be able to call our functions or reference them. So after we ask to use the printed file name where you wish to, where you would like to read from, we're going to call the function and check to see if the file exists. So we're going to say file in. That's a local variable inside of this parameter. It's really the actual variable. And in file is going to equal to check the file. Now check file is the name of the function that we just created. So the computer is going to perform the task of this function when it's being called, return the information back to the main program by way of the variable names. Let's see if this program actually works, because this is the way it looks now. Here's the check file function. And just before we do that, let's go ahead on and say in check file function module. So let's see if this program works. Enter the file where you would like to read from. I will say philo. That file doesn't exist, so we know that works. So we'll type in philosopher's. Enter the file name where you wish to write the file. I'll just say philo output. What heading would you like to use for your title in the file? And I'll just say philosopher report list. And so now what it's saying is that the file was created. Go find it in the folder where your Python program was located. So let's find it. Okay, so here's the last one that we said. We call it philo output. Let's take a look at it and see if it says philosophers report list. So it did create the file. The function works. Let's go to the next one. The next function is going to be rather short. We're just going to eliminate 2 lines here. This is what our function consists of. So we're going to cut this out. So this third function is going to be used to allow users to enter a file name where the report is going to be written. And so now we're going to call that. So here's what the function is going to look like for output. You're probably asking, well, why are we taking out the time to do this? Because if we want the computer to write output to a file, we can reuse this code. All this code can be reused for other programs. It doesn't matter what we call the local variable names. And we have local variable names in here. So these are the local variables. Let's run the program now. Philosopher, or something like that. We know that if it doesn't say philosophers, and we'll just say output 1. Put in all caps, philosopher report. And so let's check to see if the output exists. The file, yep, here's philosopher output. And here it is again. And of course, every time I run the program, it's going to create a different file. If that file exists already, it will write over it again because we're writing the file. In the next video, we're going to show you how to take these functions out, store them in a separate file, and import them into any file that we want to use. Stay tuned for the next important video.